Great. Welcome, everybody. I wanted to start class today sharing with you a picture. It's an old picture taken probably in 1992, so 30 years ago. This is my senior year Mishnah class. This is my instructor, Rabbi Dr. Dov Zlotnick, alav shalom. I can't say enough good things about him. And four of my colleagues, two of whom were a year younger and two of whom were in my class. And this guy over here, that's me. Ooh. Oh my God, no beard. Yeah, that was like the last time I didn't have a beard. But isn't that nice? Really just sort of a very sweet. We met in his office because it was a small group. It's a very high level class, and he expected a ton of work every week. But we met in his office, and it was really just both intimate and intense. And I still think about him a lot, and I'm obviously influenced by his teachings still to today. So I'll dedicate it to him and his memory and the way he taught me. Okay. Where's my share?
Where did you say that was, Rabbi Norry?
That's at the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, on the Upper West Side. I think it was 1992, 91, 92, somewhere around then. Yeah. All right. Let's look here, and we'll. I want to do a little bit of review, and then we'll forge ahead. I want to try to do 3 Mishnayot today on really very radically different subjects. It's sort of a great a run of different Mishnayot. I believe the 2 that we did last time were this one from Sanhedrin, the first Mishnah in Sanhedrin, that dealt with the number of judges in different kinds of cases and how almost all cases are adjudicated with 3 judges, but capital cases are adjudicated with 23. We also talked about this Mishnah from Brachot, about 2 blessings. One that you're supposed to say when you visit a place where miracles were performed for our ancestors, and another when you visit a place where idol worship was uprooted from the land of Israel. And after we tried to understand both some of those in their own context, we expanded it a little bit to say, well, what would be a modern day example of a place from which idol worship was uprooted, or that where a miracle happened to our ancestors? And we tried to expand it even a little further to say, well, maybe not just idol worship, right? Maybe there's other falsehoods and evils for which we would say this blessing if we felt that they had been uprooted and history had succeeded, kind of thing. One of these very pragmatic and practical application of the law in everyday judicial procedures, and one of them very personal, not public or communal at all. It's just what an individual, ha-ro'eh, a person who sees. It's just on your own experience, and it's just a short spiritual exercise. So you can see in these 2 Mishnayot really a lot of the breadth in both content and substance and style even in the Mishnah. Okay. The next one we're going to look at is from Mishnah Pe'ah. And as we have always done, we're going to locate it in the Shisha Sidarim, the 6 orders. Please let me know if I'm using too much jargon, okay? This is a class where I intentionally use a lot of that language. And because again, it's my claim, you know, we're Mishnah scholars here. We're exploring this on a higher level, and so I'm going to use a lot of Hebrew, but let me know if I'm losing you. Okay, that I don't want to do. Mishnah Peah is in the first Seder, Zra'im, which deals with agricultural issues. And you can see Peah means the corner, or the corner of the field. So our subject is the Torah's rule regarding the leaving of the corner of your field for poor people to come and take food at their ease. And remember, well, not remember, but I want to mention before we get into the text itself, you have to leave the corners of a square field for people to come and take at their will. Poor people do not have to come and ask you for food. You, as a farmer, are obligated to leave a portion of it, and you're supposed to leave it at the edge of your field so they can come without having to come even onto your property, right? It's a sort of anonymity thing. They could just walk by the edge of your field and, you know, pick peppers, whatever they want, you know, apples, whatever it is, dates, who knows, you know, wheat, anything, right? Anything that you grow is subject to the obligation to set aside peah. Okay. With that background, was there a question?
I have a question. How widely is that still done in Israel today?
The practical consideration is that there's really no minimum amount that you have to leave. So it's very easy to do. It's a very low bar. I don't, the answer to how widespread a practice is, I don't know.
Okay.
But I wouldn't be surprised if, especially in places like Dati Kibbutzim, right? Kibbutz is where they have an Orthodox religious perspective. They do that. This is a Shemitah year, which is why you probably see more Israeli produce in American supermarkets than normal, because there are certain things that they're not selling domestically because it's Shemitah. So
one of the Orthodox websites that I get, because it's a food website, they have been asking for contributions to support farmers during the Shemitah year.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So they do still practice a lot of this stuff. The elu mafsikin la pe'ah. Here's our closer issue. These are the things that divide the corner of the field from the rest of the field. The question is, how do you know when the corner of the field is over? Right? I have to leave a corner of the field. I don't have to leave my whole field, right? That means catastrophe for the farmer. You don't want to do that. That's not right. The poor people can take food, but they can't take all of it. And I, as the farmer, I get to designate how much I am leaving, right? I could be very generous in some fields and not generous in others. There could be produce that I'm more willing to part with, less. I mean, there could be 1,000 considerations, but I still get to decide, right? But I have to make that clear. Right? I have to show where there's a division. So there are several acceptable ways to divide and show, to boundary the corner of the field. And these are them. A river, right? That's a natural boundary and it would be recognizable. Irrigation ditches, sort of an artificial river. In other words, a flowing ditch of water. You can tell an irrigation ditch. A private road, a public path, meaning not quite a road for vehicles, but one where it's still clear. A permanent private path for summer and winter days. And here we see the first distinction between what might be acceptable if it were a publicly maintained infrastructure versus a private one, right? I might have a road, a dirt road on my property, but I wouldn't keep it as well as a public road were kept because it's more traveled. The more traveled the road, the more clear it is, right? That a path gets worn, and only by traveling over it does it stay worn. So seasonally, my private road might disappear, right? So it's only if I have like a real private, a permanent one. Then there are some other things. A pit, right? Meaning, like a gorge kind of thing, even if it doesn't have water in it. A meadow, and a different crop. All right, so a meadow is just an unplanted place. So obviously, if I start at the corner and I move my way in, and then suddenly there's a big wide open meadow before the next bit of farm starts, well, I know that's the end, even if there's not a path or a fence or a road or a ditch or any of those things that would be more obvious, because a meadow is unsown territory. And if I'm coming, what if there's like rows of different crops, and I come in and I'm taking for myself as a poor person corn, and then I come to wheat. Well, obviously that's the end of the cornfield, and I can't, go farther than that. Presumably, the second crop is not yet ready to be eaten. It's growing. It's clearly identifiable as another crop, but it's not like you could just start at the next one and, make that your next corner of your next field. So this is what we call the Reisha, the Rosh, the first part of the Mishnah, where it's just stated, these are the things. And it goes right all the way through. It's anonymous. Nobody is attributed to have said this particular list. We don't know who said it, although I'll say something about that in a second. I see you, Alejandra, just a second. And there's no disputes, no machloket. Okay? So, yeah, Alejandra.
Can I have a question? So it's
Howard first. He was raising his hand first.
Howard, go ahead. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say, they say this in the singular, the corner of the field.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that you only do one corner of a whole field, or do you have, if it's a square or rectangular field, you have four corners, or if you have a round field, you have no corners?
Right. So round fields are a very new invention. That's one thing, right? When you fly over the country and you see all these big round fields, that's a very, 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 very new thing. And it's only because of rotating watering, right? The water comes in the center and an arm goes all the way around to make, the watering from a central point. That was never how anybody before, my lifetime did that kind of stuff. And land is almost always divided in squares or rectangles. I think the default assumption is that is the way you divide it. and
Corners.
How many corners?
right. So it's all four corners, right? You have to leave a little bit of all four corners. Yeah.
But you're saying they could take the whole side.
No, I'm saying that I was just trying to explain how each of these very different kinds of things. I mean, you know, an irrigation ditch is very different than a different plot of crop. But either one of those can mark off the corner. For example, I'm planting corn. I want to let you know that only this much of the corner is available to you. So I measure out 10 by 10 in the corner, and then I plant a right angle of wheat because I don't want to dig a ditch there. I don't want to do that. There's not a pit there. There's not a gorge there. There's not a path there. I want to make an identifier, and I don't want to lose any of my land. I still want to make use of all the land I have. So I plant another crop as not as a separate field. It's still a little line of wheat in a field of corn. And that is a visible enough identifier. Look, here's the when push comes to shove, right? When push comes to shove, somebody's taking my food beyond the line I intended. And I take them to adjudication. I say, hey, dude, you cannot take the dates beyond this line. I left those date trees over there for you, but you can't come with your basket and harvest in my field. Give me back the dates. And he says, well, there was no line there. I didn't know. You have to draw a line. He said, what do you mean there's no line there? I put another crop right in there. There's a totally a line there. The judge is going to say, based on this Mishnah, the farmer is right. If there's no other line of crops or any of these things, he's going to say to the farmer, you blew it. You had an obligation to draw a line. You didn't draw the line. There's no minimum or maximum. The guy can take what he wants. That's the kind of application that they're considering.
Didn't they
that-
have fences?
Well, fences are hard because they're expensive.
Mm.
And you know, if you have a big enough field,
True.
yeah, it's tough. They weren't ranchers. No. Alejandra. Oh, Howard, was that a little clearer?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good.
Okay, so as I was reading with you, the term, or at least the technicalities for determining the limit of a crop and the part or the corner that it's for public use, I was kind of wondering, how would we take this Mishnah in the modern world and mix it up with modern rules and laws for determining public property versus private property, and how public crops or community crops, you've seen those, that sometimes communities take a specific place and they grow stuff, would help us fulfill this Mishnah?
So that is an outstanding question, of course, and I'm always interested, right, in how the Mishnah makes us think. The goal of the Mishnah is to make us thinkers. It's not to make us memorize ancient Mishnah. So, you know, score one for the Mishnah. It's making us think, like, how, you know, if I took this seriously and tried to apply it in my own way, what would the implications be? I think it's complicated. our economy doesn't exactly work the way the economy in the ancient world worked. And it's not clear that their economy ever worked exactly like this, in actuality. This is kind of an ideal description of life. But I will say that the issue of not enough food, the issue of hunger is, as I understand it, is not really driven by the fact that we don't have enough food. It's that the food isn't where the people are. This Mishnah assumes that the people are where the food is, but we have distanced the production of most of our food, right? None of the wheat that I eat, none of the flour that I use is grown anywhere near where I live. None of some of the corn, right? I mean, they grow corn in Georgia. So, I could buy Georgia corn. I could go up into the mountains and very quickly find big cornfields in people's, and my guess is poor people do take the corner of fields. That if you are dirt poor in the Georgia mountains, you go and take ears of corn from some guy's field that he will never, ever know, never really significantly miss. And you're not really taking too much and harming. So my guess is that actually happens quite a bit. I know there are restaurants that, send food to food kitchens rather than throwing it out. Our biggest problem is food waste, is that we throw so much food away. It's remarkable. I mean, the numbers are staggering. So our problem is a delivery problem. The question would be, can you move the corner of your field? I would even think, like, hey, I can't wait for the poor person to come and take my food. I have to actually bring it to them. I have to identify an amount of my food that I give straight up where I know it's needed. Maybe I'm being a little too practical and not spiritual, but I do think in more rural communities, it would be easier to play this out in sort of, Pennsylvania Dutch kind of communities where people still live in close-knit agricultural communities where everyone is a farmer. But some people are poor farmers and some people are better off. That this is a way you help. And it is also only one of a series of 3 very specific things described by the Torah. Also forgotten, when you go through and you harvest and you missed some, you have to leave that. And I mean, it's subject to, specifics, but, the stuff that falls to the ground as you are harvesting your wheat, you have to leave that for people to come after you and pick up. And there are places in the world where that is still like a real way people get their food, is they go behind the farmers and pick up what falls as a result of harvesting. The short answer after that really long answer, Alejandra, is we are not doing nearly enough to feed people who are hungry. But not all of that is on the farmers, because they're sort of our agents at this point. Yeah, Barbara.
I just wanted to remind people that we had an example of our social action committee going out to work with an okra farm to
Right.
redistribute. And we've done the same thing with apples here.
Yeah.
So some people are working to not totally rebalance the distribution system, but to work on a little part of it, just as you mentioned, the waste from or the unused food from restaurants. So.
Right. Okay, I want to move ahead a little bit. The end of our mission, the Resha lists the long list of things that are a legitimate boundary. It's anonymous and unanimous. But we see these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Oh no, I'm sorry. But we see the Seifa has a disagreement in it over one specific thing. So they list all the things they agree on. And then at the end, they tag on, by the way, here's one issue we disagree on. If one harvests hay, if your crop is hay, which is not for human consumption, people don't eat hay, but farmers still grow it. That's why it's a separate issue. If you're a hay farmer, then that's a division. And you've gone through and you cut the hay. But that's according to Rabbi Meir. But the sages say it's not a division unless it's already been plowed under. In other words, the sages are slightly more strict than Rabbi Meir. He's willing to give a leniency in this one particular case that the sages are not prepared to give. And we're not really sure why. They do not offer a reason. But it's probably a practical consideration about recognizability or something like that. Okay, next Mishnah I want to go to. This is in Mishnah Machshirin. Machshirin, you can probably hear the kasher word, the kosher machsher, like hechsher, right? Machshirim is all the way over here in Masechet Taharot. It has to do with tum'ah and tahara, with ritual or spiritual. Well, they are usually translated as purity, tahara, and tum'ah, impurity. Those are not great translations of the word because of all the associations that come with those words in English. But for better and for worse, those are generally the words that get used as translation, and I'll probably use them. But I really prefer to use the Hebrew, right? Something is tameh, that's impure. That means you don't touch it, you stay away from it. Something is tahor, that means it's okay for contact. You touch it and you interact with it. It is a yin-yang nature of the world. Everything, everywhere in the world, at some point, becomes tameh. It's a physical, in the Torah's mindset, it's a physical reality of the world. Certain things, primarily things that are associated with physical death and decay, are considered tameh. When you contact them, you become tameh. That's not sick or evil or immoral. Nobody can remain tahor forever. It's practically impossible. Things which your own body does make you tameh. Contact with other people who have those things makes you tameh. Contact with corpses and dead things make you tameh. So, I mean, this is a matter of life. You know, you go through life, sometimes you are tameh. From the Torah's perspective, when you are tameh, you are restricted from access to the sanctuary, the temple in Jerusalem. You cannot go and offer sacrifices. Priests cannot do their service in the temple. The temple is kadosh, and you have to be tahor to go into the temple. So there is a practical consideration to all of tahara. And anything things can become tameh. A dish, a clay jug, clothing, houses, tents can become tameh. A tent which has a corpse in it becomes tameh. This is one of the things that sort of, in order to understand the Mishnah in Taharot and much of the Torah, you simply have to accept that this is true. That this is a true description of reality. I don't know if you think it is true or not. It doesn't matter. For our purposes, we are going to accept that it is all true. It's an obvious and natural truth that you can see and that is not disputed. My analogy, the analogy that I like to use, is the Eastern concept of chi, of the flow of energy in the body and in the universe between you and the rest of the world. I was talking once with my Taekwondo master, and we were just talking about chi, and I'm not really a mystic, right? I'm a very sort of rational, linear kind of person. And I said, he said something about you have to, chi, and I asked him after class, he said, Hillel, you have to accept it. It is true. There is energy which flows through your body, which is a part of the grand universal energy, and you can be aware of it and you can move it. And if you don't believe that, your martial arts will be hindered and limited. And I bought in, I accept. And you start to gain experience where that's actually true. So, nobody can really point to or measure chi. But Rabbi, you can't. Where is it, and how does it move? And like, if that were true, then it can be scientifically measured. That is correct, and I don't care, because it's not one of those things that for me works that way, right? I began to act as if it were true, and you know what? My punches and my kicks became significantly more powerful. You start to think like, body chi, and the body actually starts from some place in the body, and you can, throw fireballs. I mean, you can do stuff like that. People put their hands through concrete. Like this. I put my hand through that. This hand. Because I saw it, I visualized that my hand went through to the ground. Otherwise, if you don't believe that, you're going to hurt your hand. So, okay, that's Tuma and Tahara. Now, the issue we have in Machshirin is one of the specifics of Tuma and Tahara is that certain liquids enable things to receive tum'ah. Okay, it's like priming the pump, right? If these liquids you come into contact with these liquids, they can convey tum'ah to you. They are machshirin. They make it possible, right? Kosher in the sense of possible, okay, ready for receiving tum'ah. Is that clear? Okay. Ze'at beitim, perspiration from houses. In other words, when stones, sometimes stone houses will sweat, right? Stones can absorb and release moisture. So, and in pits, if you go down into like caverns, the walls are wet, right? There's water that's coming out of the walls, and caves is tahor. That liquid is tahor. If you go down into the cavern and you get the water from the caverns, the perspiration, what they're calling perspiration, it's tahor, don't worry about it. You can still go to the temple, do all the things that you need to be able to do and remain tahor. Human perspiration is tahor. Right? So we're good. People are people. If somebody's sweat drips on you or you get this, no, don't worry, no problem. This does not convey tumah. What if a person drank? See, here again, we're going to see the Mishnah loves to push the envelope again, right? But what if this really unusual thing happened, which is he drank water which was tameh. That makes him tameh, right? Or does it? And he perspired. According to the Mishnah, even that perspiration is tahor. In other words, the human body distills the tum'ah out in its perspiration. The perspiration remains tahor, pure. Now, if they're going to explore that a little further, what if he entered into drawn water like water out of a well, as opposed to water captured, rainwater or lake or river water, right? But drawn water, human carried water, is assumed to be tameh. That's why a mikveh uses rainwater. It's captured water, not drawn. That's a fundamental issue with mikvaot. So if I went into a pool of drawn water and I perspire, meaning I come out of the pool, it's not that I'm perspiring in the pool, right? I go in the pool is tameh. I come out and sweat, the water on my body is tameh. Why? We just said perspiration is tahor. What happened?
The system wasn't filtered by the body.
Right, the water that's, right, it's not that he drank tameh water, it's that he immersed in tameh water. Excellent, Alham. And therefore, the water which is on his body, at least some of it is not his perspiration. And since it has not been filtered through anything, it has not been made tahor in any way, the water that clings onto him is tameh. And when it mixes unfiltered with his own perspiration, even that perspiration is tameh, and it is a machshir. It can make, that liquid can make other things tameh. However, if he has dried off, nistafeg, and later he perspired, then his perspiration is tahor. Back to the original. In other words, it is strictly situational. His perspiration is only tameh because of the tameh water that's on him. But once he takes a towel and wipes all that water off, and then he runs home, and he's sweating when he gets home, that perspiration is tahor, no problem. Any comments on any of that?
I have a
I have a
comment.
question.
Go ahead, Margaret.
I had a question. I had the impression that if you were tameh, that you would have to do something to get rid of the tameh.
Correct.
And in this instance, this guy isn't seems like just drying himself off doesn't seem to fall into the
Correct.
category of the things I thought people had to do.
Right. So the issue here, Margaret, is not so much his tum'ah, it's whether this liquid
Ah, okay.
can be machshir, something else, to become tameh. Right. So generally speaking, what you have to do when you are tameh is you have to go to some kind of mikvah. Depending on the level of tumah, you have to go to, there are multiple different levels of mikvah. And the standard one is just one of them. But that's sort of the standard, you know, which is this mid-size mikvah of naturally gathered water. Another example, by the way, is like nitilat yadayim, right? That's a much lower, smaller mikvah, as it were, right? It's your, you know, raising up your hands in that way so that you can eat of the bread, which is representative of the sacrifice from the temple, which you would not be able to eat of if you were not tahor. Right? We're reenacting something ancient there. But the issue is not his tum'ah, because really, unless there's something I want to do that requires me to be tahor, I'm just a regular Joe. I'm not a Kohen. Right? I can walk around tameh without any real negative consequence. It's not bad for you to be tameh. It's just a state of being. It's like sad versus happy, right? Like sad is not immoral. It's not immoral to be sad. You're allowed to walk around sad. Like you don't have to become happy. But, you know, eventually, if you want to do certain things, you have to go to a mikveh. If you want to go to the temple, if you want to eat of the sacrifices, if you
Want to get married.
right. Mm-hmm. By the way, there's you can So and it's of course not hard to become tahor. The bar is very low. You just have to immerse in water. That's it.
I have a mikveh question.
Yeah.
I thought, here's the question. If you don't have enough water that's captured, can you mix drawn water with it and still have a kosher mikveh?
There is the answer is yes, but there is a minimum amount of water which must be captured water. So once you have the minimum amount, which is 40 se'ah, let's say 40 gallons, for lack of a better translation. Se'ah is a measure of volume. Once you have 40 gallons, you can mix with that 40 gallons 400 million gallons, and all 400 million gallons contained within the same gathering will be kosher, will be tahor. If you do not have 40 gallons, then you do not have a mikvah. But 40 gallons is not really enough for a person to immerse in, at least not a big person. A child, yes, but picture a 50-gallon drum, right? That's just not that big, right? I could not fully immerse in a 50-gallon drum. But a mikvah doesn't have to be much bigger than, big enough for me to immerse in, even though that is more than 40 se'ah. So you can mix drawn water with the naturally gathered water, and that is sufficient to extend that, right? Let's say now I have 100 gallons that are kosher water. I can then actually divide that water and add more water to both of those and make two separate mikvaot, right? Once the water is kosher water, it's all kosher water. And then you can drain the mikvah out so long as you maintain 40 gallons in a separate little bore, a separate little cistern. That's how it works. There's a minimum size cistern that constantly gathers rainwater. so it's always topped off. You fill up the big tub and mix the waters together so that all the water becomes tahor. Then you can drain out, separate out the water back into the separate cistern, drain out the big tub, and you still have a reserve of water that's still getting topped off with the rainwater.
So could we take the 40-gallon mikvah water and put it into Lake Purdy, and then all our bathtubs would have mikvah quality water?
No, because Lake Purdy is already a mikvah. But once you draw the water out of it into the water system and through your tap, it is now drawn water. You could immerse in the lake as a mikvah. In some ways, it's a better mikvah. But of course, it's in public. So that could be an issue. But once you draw the water out of the lake, then it is not mikvah water anymore.
Okay.
It's separated out. Mikvah is the gathering together of the water. Once you separate that water from it, if I take a cup, here's the example. I have a full mikvah of kosher water. I take a cup of water and I take the cup out and I separate it out, a 40-gallon cup, and I move it across town. No good.
No good.
No, because I've separated it. It's the togetherness.
That was my
Mikvah.
question too, yeah.
Yeah, mikvah means a gathering together.
Because none of the water in Birmingham is drawn from a well. We use all surface water, so
Right,
that was my
right.
question.
But it is still drawn from the lake, right, from the reservoir.
So those old baptisms in the river were more authentic than those bathtubs up there at the front of the church.
Yes, what was John the Baptist doing?
Going to a mikvah.
He was doing this. He was doing mikvah. John was Yochanan. And he was a person who was serious about mikvah, who was a mikvahizer.
So I have another question. When people wash their hands before eating,
Purely
they're
symbolic.
washing. Okay.
Purely the hand washing
Yeah.
here, purely symbolic, really not applicable in Tuma and Tahara, practically speaking.
I have a question. Oh, sorry, Donnie, were you gonna go?
No, you go first.
So if the lake water is tahor and you go in and you're perspiring and you're tahor, but once you get out, you're tameh, but the lake water itself is tahor, is that the idea that you've pulled out that water and that's why all of a sudden that's tameh because it's no longer
Correct.
where it
Right,
came
because that water is now separate from
the lake?
on you, right? If
Okay,
you
it's not the mix, it's not the mixing of that with your own perspiration. It's not the idea of the
Correct.
mixing, it's the water. Okay.
right,
Just wanted to-
right. You separated that out from. By the way, if you jump back in the lake is big enough to subsume that water. Right? It's not like a concern that now you would, affect the lake with that small amount of water or the mikvah with that small amount of water. Like I could go in the mikvah, come out of the mikvah, go back in the mikvah. Because even if the water that I separated out, is for that moment, it doesn't matter because there's sufficient water in there for me to bring back in and mix all that water back in together. A little esoteric and confusing, but it actually follows a internal logic. Yeah, Donnie.
I just find it interesting that you can become tahor through an external, like it's still external, as opposed to like drinking something or
Mm.
Whatever. I don't fully understand Tuma and Tahara and all the ways you can become Tameh and Tahor, but
it's not medicine, right? You don't need medicine to become tahor, right? It's like when you said like it's something you would drink or internalize, right? It's not a disease. It doesn't. It's not cooties, right? You know what I mean? It's not. It doesn't. It's not like ick, which you can't get rid of. All you really need is water. In fact, that's all you can use. It's the only way to become tahor is water, and natural water.
So I am still confused. If you jump in the mikveh, okay,
Yeah.
and then you come out and you're dripping wet and you've separated water,
Right.
how come you're not tameh already again?
Well, because
separated out the water.
you're not tameh because you have not come into contact with something that is tameh.
Okay.
That water cannot be used as mikvah water.
Right.
Right? It's not mayim tahor until it is mixed back into a mikvah which has 40 se'ah. Because that mikvah of 40 se'ah, a gathered body of natural water, is what conveys tahara. Yeah, Suzanne.
When the Chevra Kadisha washes a body and they pour the water and we say the blessing,
Right,
Mayim Taharim, Tahor, Tahor.
right.
But it's not what we use then is not really Mayim Tahor because we get it from the sink.
That is unique to the tahara for a corpse, because you cannot immerse a corpse in a regular mikveh. There are, for very practical considerations, and of course, a human corpse is actually conveys the highest level of tum'ah that there is. That's sort of like the super infector, if you will. But there are funeral homes which have a like pulley operated mikvah where you can have the corpse on on wood and hoist them up, move them over, dunk them in a kosher mikvah, and avoid having to use the buckets. But the buckets are sort of an accommodation to funeral rites. I don't say accommodation, an aspect of funeral rites and of the tahara that's required for it. It's a specific kind of tahara in a specific circumstance, and it's the only circumstance that's like that. If the only place I ever saw that was at a Jewish funeral home in New York City, where they had a dedicated, this was a place that only did Jewish funerals, and they had a dedicated contraption for doing a mikvah easily with a corpse. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to sort of pull it off practically. Any others?
I had a question.
Touch a tameh person, does that make you tameh?
If you what?
If you touch someone who's tameh, does that make you tameh?
Yeah, pretty much. That's just to go back to the John the Baptist thing. That's the thing with Jesus talking with lepers and prostitutes, right? It's not that they're the low life of society. He goes and sits with tameh people on purpose, with people who you avoid because they make you tameh. And he's like, I don't care. You know, oh, I can't go into the temple. Well, they're more important than the temple, right? I mean, that was sort of his, that's the gist of meeting with lepers and prostitutes. It's not, that's the the revolutionary radicalness of what he's doing there.
But it wasn't just that they were tameh, right? Because in Muslim, a lot of people were tameh.
Right, that's right. Me, right now,
Yeah.
right. I'm tameh right now. I mean, when was the last time I went to the mikveh?
Yeah.
Right? I've been around human corpses within very close proximity. I've been to the hospital. I'm sure there's tumah all over the hospitals. You
It's not like you
put
were
your hands around a
ostracized.
bunch of people, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
tumah it's natural. It's not bad,
Mhm.
but you can't stay that way and do certain things. It's bad in that way. Yeah. Alejandra, you got the last word.
Okay, so going back to March's comment about coming out and her being confused with whether the water that was dripping from your body becoming tuma instead of tahor. I'm trying to see the logic, or at least the basic principle for determining what water is suitable for a mikvah and not. What I'm thinking is that when you draw the water, you're taking that substance from its natural state, and therefore it stops being appropriate for a mikvah versus leaving it where it was in its natural form, how Adonai intended. It's like the body being itself naturally a purifier because it was a creation of Adonai. Is that the basic principle for determining what water is appropriate for mikvah or not? Like taking it from its natural state?
Yes, it's the separating from, right? When water is in its natural state, either gathered by rainfall, like a puddle even, right? Or the ocean, rivers and lakes. It is ma'im chayim, right? It is connected with the great water life source of the world. All water is all water. It all mixes together and moves around. There's never been a drop of water added to the earthly system since the beginning. So when it's connected to the great source of life, which is water. And when it is separated, it's not bad, it's not evil water, but it loses the connectedness, and it is separated. And until it is returned through some, natural cycle of the water cycle, then it is separate. I don't know if that's helpful or not. I guess the more spiritual side of it is the incredible importance of water. And I don't just mean practically, because there's no question that it is probably the single most practical necessity, other than air. We need it more than we need any other thing. We are it. The compelling majority of us will return to the great water cycle. We will become water. It's only a little bit ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and water to water. And so we are connected. This is an exercise in the connectedness of human beings to the earth and its life and death cycle. And I think I'm going to leave it there. Next week, we'll get to the third one that I wanted to get to, which is an issue of Shabbat. We'll start with a specific issue of Shabbat after we review these two. And thanks so much for coming. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's fun.
Thank you.